My dear friends, today in the Frontline Focus we will check out the most recent news from the most underreported areas of Ukraine. We'll also check out the frontline updates, discuss Putin's ambitions, his failed summer offensive, and not only that, I'm operator Starsky and this is the Frontline Focus. Let's roll. Tonight's terror Russian strike on Kyiv took lives of 6 civilians, 2 more were killed in Chernihiv Oblast yesterday due to the Russian Lancet drone attack. One of the craziest updates of today was that the apartment of famous Ukrainian singer Taras Topola from Antitila band was hit. The Antitila band is sometimes called the Ukrainian Imagine Dragons, which makes this report absolutely insane. But as we can see, the Russian terrorism does not spare anyone. At the same time, we often talk about Kyiv. Obviously, I come from Kyiv myself. Most of my friends live there. But the front line in Ukraine is almost 1,000 miles long, and Ukrainian citizens in those areas are being hit by the Russian fire every single day. Let's start up north in Sumy, right on the Russian border. Since mid-June, Sumy was within reach of Russian strike drones, and in the last week Russia launched a major artillery barrage, and the following rocket strike killed dozens of people, injuring up to 100 citizens, showing that urban areas are extremely vulnerable to the Russian terrorist attacks. Today, emergency services and civilians are preparing for incoming strikes, and evacuations and fortifications are ongoing. Moving south to Donetsk region, in Kramatorsk, 7 explosions rocked both residential buildings and an industrial zone, damaging a 4-story apartment block and leaving someone trapped under the rubble. Rescue teams pulled out at least 2 people, including a woman and a child, and 1 person was wounded. In Slovyansk, a private home was struck tragically. A 17-year-old boy was killed and 3 others injured. Community support networks are forming and local leaders are coordinating aid and shelter. But with all that, the terror Russian attacks keep reminding us how vulnerable Ukrainian civilians remain. And it absolutely doesn't matter if someone's communication agenda somewhere in the establishment bans the officials from calling the Russian war crimes. It doesn't change absolutely anything. Ukrainian civilians keep suffering because Ukraine needs better air defense and because we need more actions from our allies. I think that by today it's absolutely clear that no peace talks will ever stop Putin, and that the terrorists and war criminals should be obviously dealt with in a different way. Let's take a moment to look at what's been happening across the front lines in the past 24 hours, because it's been another intense day for Ukrainian forces, with 142 recorded combat cases from north to south. Up north, near the border in the Siversk and Slobozhansk directions, Russian terrorists tried to push through 20 times, but they were repelled. These areas have seen repeated small group attacks and probing missions that basically tested Ukraine's defense near the Russian border. Then further south in the Kharkiv region, what's called the southern Slobozhansk direction, there were 7 more assault attempts. Ukrainian defenders managed to hold their lines, but the pressure is clearly steady in this area. Over in the Liman direction, closer to the forests and river valleys of Donetsk, Russian terrorists tried 17 times to break through. This area has seen constant battles, especially with Russian terrorists trying to move west from Kremlin now. And now let's talk about some of the hottest zones right now, the Toretsk direction. Ukrainian forces there fought off 21 attacks, but the most intense action came around Pokrovsk, where Ukrainian troops faced a staggering 44 assault attempts in just one day. It's become a pressure point, likely because of its strategic roads and logistics links, but defenders held their ground under constant fire. And down in the southwest, near villages like Vesele, Shevchenko, Bogatyr, and Svobodne Pole, the Russian terrorists launched 10 more attacks, and this is part of the Novopavlivka direction. Basically, across the whole map from the forests of Liman to the fields of the south, Ukrainian defenders are facing non-stop pressure, but despite all the efforts, the Russian summer offensive seems to have failed. According to Estonian Colonel Ants Kiviselg, the massive Russian offensive that was mentioned in the media so many times earlier this spring has failed due to the powerful Ukrainian resistance, because Ukrainian defenders utilize impressive number of attack drones on a daily basis to defend from the Russian invaders, and we have only seen just a few mechanized attacks performed by the Russian terrorists because they seemingly lost vast majority of their tanks and armored vehicles and can only rely on traditional Russian meat assaults from now on. While situation in Sumy is extremely dangerous for Ukrainian civilians, it's also a big problem for the Russian terrorists who struggle to achieve any progress in this area, facing strong Ukrainian resistance. Just recently at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum on 20th of June 2025, internationally wanted war criminal Putin made a ridiculous declaration. He called Ukraine and Russia one people and said that in that sense the whole of Ukraine belongs to Russians. He also suggested that where a Russian soldier steps, that land becomes Russia's. And he even hinted that Russian terrorists might advance towards Sumy to establish a buffer zone, though he claimed Sumy wasn't the immediate target, but we all know that Putin is extremely trustworthy and reliable, right? I think by now even the absolutely brain-dead people out there realize that Putin doesn't really want to stop the war, just as we were saying back in March. In the latest exchange of bodies, Russia returned 20 corpses it claimed were Ukrainian soldiers, but as it turned out, they were actually Russian terrorists. Some were even found with Russian passports, and one turned out to be an Israeli national fighting alongside Russia. Ukrainian President Zelensky suggested that Moscow is using those deaths as propaganda, trying to imply that Ukrainian losses are far heavier than they really are, and masking the real scale of Russian casualties, most probably preparing public opinion for future mobilization. In response, the Kremlin has dismissed these claims, declaring it impossible that it would hand over its own dead as Ukrainian, but basically that's exactly what the Russian propaganda does every single day. For example, showing Ukrainian footage of Russian terrorists becoming a fertilizer and claiming that they were actually Ukrainian soldiers, again because Russians are so trustworthy and never lie. And to finish this episode on a positive note, here's a little piece of good news out of Kyiv, and I would say that this is something that really cuts through all the darkness. In the Solomiansky district, after some of the recent Russian strikes, rescuers were digging through the rubble of destroyed building and they found a tiny puppy. It had been trapped under the debris and the emergency crew pulled it out, wrapped it in a blanket and gave it water right there on the spot. And the best part is that they found actually the owners too, and the dog's people were injured in the blast but alive, and now they're back together. I mean that it might not sound like a big deal in the middle of the war, but in fact it is, because these kinds of rescues mean a lot, and the team working out there, humans and search dogs together, they're doing absolutely incredible job. With that, my dear friends and family, I wish you all a beautiful day. Please subscribe to stay informed about the most important updates and share this content to help Ukraine be heard. I'll see you in the comments. I'm Operator Starsky. As always, be safe.